George Best knocked out Michael Caine, bedded Bond girls, and partied so hard his wife stabbed him in the arse. From postal sex to stints in the slammer, this is the story of Georgie Best. Welcome back to The Upshot. I'm Jack. Zach is here as ever.
Hello, Jack.
Hello. And our guest this week is comedian Vittorio Angelone. Welcome.
Nice to be here.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Vittorio got in character at 3:45 a.m. this morning.
Yeah, I'm fucking hanging out my ass.
It's very George Best.
Yeah. Well, you showed up.
At least you-
Yeah, George Best really wouldn't. I was like, am I that guy?
You're going to do the comedy equivalent of scoring a hat-trick at Old Trafford now.
What is the comedy equivalent of scoring a hat-trick at Old Trafford? Because 3 jokes doesn't feel like a lot of jokes for a show.
I'm gonna need more.
You're gonna need more
from
than
today,
3,
It's gonna
I
be a
would
bit
say.
thin. This is a 2-parter as
I
well.
was aiming for a hat-trick at my comedy show. God. One every 20 minutes? That's awful. Really awful.
Do you want to plug anything?
I've got a podcast, Guide to Parenting, but
Very
apart
good.
from that,
So you and Mike Rice
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about everything except parenting.
yeah, we'd try as much as possible. Neither of us have kids. What would we talk about?
It's great. Really recommend
I
that.
read the byline on your website said that you named it that to attract single mums.
Yeah. That's who we're trying to.
How's that going?
Yeah.
Really good.
It's quite George Best as well. Actually, I think he prefers married ones.
Yes, he's a big-
We'll come on to the Mr. Steal Your Girl
Yeah,
side of his
he's
life. And what's your Insta where people can follow you?
Insta Vittorio Angelone, best of fucking luck spelling it.
Yeah, we'll link to it, and then you can get clips of Vittorio's comedy where he'll crack one every 20 minutes.
Yeah.
It's George Best. I guess we're all of the age where we mainly remember him, quite sad images of him jaundiced in a hospital. But this is going to be it's going to be a fun one. Obviously, you're from Belfast, aren't you?
I am, yes. I'm from quite near where George Best is from.
Craigar, is that where he's from?
Craiga.
Craigar.
Good try.
Good to have
I
someone
respect
correcting.
it. Listen,
Yeah.
I almost didn't know what you were saying. And then I was like, oh no, that's around the corner from my parents' house. Craiga. The
So
Craiga estate.
does he loom large as an icon?
The airport's named after him.
Yeah.
There's Belfast City, George Best Belfast City Airport, which is kind of mad. I don't know if that's looming large. Nobody refers to it. Whereas I think in Liverpool they refer
John
to it as
Lennon.
John Lennon. You'd be
Yeah.
like John Lennon.
Well, they
Airport.
got that above us only sky slogan at John Lennon.
Yeah,
Airport.
they have George Best's signature
Oh, really?
is the sign for the airport.
But do people talk about his amazing moments, whether it's dribbling through Benfica or just shagging 7 women? In
I
an
think he
afternoon?
is a bit, because Northern Ireland have had one really exceptionally brilliant footballer. We've had some solid players over the years, but if you ask me to name the 2 most favourably remembered Northern Ireland players, it's probably George Best and David Healy.
Right, yeah.
I was about to say David Healy. Are they in the same category?
I think so. David Healy has one of the best football chants ever. I'm slightly obsessive about football chants.
Yeah.
And David Healy's is one of the
Go on.
greatest. So Northern Ireland fans would just, from the stands when David Healy was playing, they would go, away in a manger, no crib for a bed. The little Lord Jesus laid down his sweet head. The stars in the bright sky look down where he lay. And it's just so long. It's so long.
Yeah, you're
but
waiting.
It's so funny. I just think that's so fucking good.
Victoria, I take it you've seen the David Healy mural. This is my friend lived next door to this, but it's my favourite football mural.
Where the fuck's that? I mean, nobody does murals like Belfast, but oh my God. What is that?
What's the rainbow thing?
It's David Healy after he got the winner against England, I believe.
I heard that from my house.
Yeah, and then he's on a sort of rainbow road with a load of sort of children's
Why?
drawings and stuff. I'm not entirely sure.
He's
but
into
it's-
Mario Kart. Would you ever leave
yeah.
That's so crazy.
Quite a different flavour.
Who's the guy in the top left with the
Because there's
gigantic
other.
head?
That's gotta be.
It's
Is that not
Frankie
George
Valley.
Best?
Is that an England player he's beat dribbled?
It'll be in the red. All their names are in the red. What?
Davey, does it say?
Davey? Just fucking
Davey, yeah.
Yeah, that's so funny that he's just called Davey. So in terms of George Best, it's I mean, he's lauded. There's a $5. You can get a $5 that has George Best on
Heard
it.
about that, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That was the mate. everybody was losing their minds when they came out. It's like, oh, did you get a George Best fiver? Did you get a George Best fiver? I think I have 2 in my like bedroom back in Belfast.
Obviously, he was a brilliant player as well. We got to mention that. We're going to talk a bit about his like.
There are like rumors about how like unbelievably good he was in terms of like just stuff that your dad says about him. There's a story, and I don't know if you have this, of like George Best was on the bus to play for Northern Ireland. Like he was just getting the bus to the game, which is so like back in my day, players got the fucking bus to the game, and that was fucking better before all this woke nonsense. And he was chatting to some guy, and some like fan was like, "Oh, George, what do you think's gonna happen? Like you're playing against Holland." And George goes, well, you know, I think we'll be all right. And the guy goes, but that Cruyff fella, very, very good player, you know, that Cruyff fella. And George Best goes, bet you a fiver I nutmeg him in the first 2 minutes. And the guy was like, what? Yeah, obviously I'll take that bet. And apparently from the kickoff, George Best picks up the ball and dribbles directly towards Johan Cruyff and nutmegs him. And just fucking absolutely insane. But it's also like, yeah, Cruyff, not a defender.
Yeah, he's not known for I was thinking that. Yeah. That's also like late career as well. Like he's kind of playing for Jewish Guild in South Africa when he's not playing that. Like.
Was this post gambling problem as well?
Yeah.
Just do anything for a fiver.
Yeah. Get it on eBay. He said, if I was ugly, you would never have heard of Pele. Sort of saying he would have knuckled down.
He was too busy shagging.
Yeah. Let's go back to 1946 when George Best is born in East Belfast. He's quite a sort of like shy, small boy. So even at the age of 15, he was 5'3" and less than 8 stone. But even at that age, just an incredible footballer, brilliant dribbler, low centre of gravity. And when Man United send a scout over to watch him, they immediately phone Matt Busby and say, I found you a genius. So United give him this 2-week trial, and George and one other boy, they catch.
I love that. I found you a genius. I give him 2 weeks.
Yeah. And he can get his own fucking ferry as well. Literally. So him and this other boy get the ferry over, and then United just said, come to Old Trafford. So they then they get a ferry to Liverpool, and then they have to like get the train,
just
I guess.
work out how to do it.
Yeah, just work out. There's no one meeting at the station. They're like, all right, we'll just go to the ground. So
that's so
there's
mad.
your genius. Anyway, so he gets this 2-week trial. They go, and then he does 1 day and a night sort of lodging with this family. And the next day, George decides he's homesick, bit overawed by the whole experience. And so he just catches the ferry back to Belfast, turns up on his parents' doorstep. And they're like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah, on like a fucking council estate in East Belfast. Imagine your son's got the chance to play for Man United. And like, look, they're not getting paid loads then, but it's like, come on, you've got a chance to make something of yourself here. And he just comes back like, nah, didn't fancy
2
it.
days later, though.
It is real like Santiago Munez vibes, isn't it? And he's just like, nah. See, I'm going to go back playing with cardboard
Does he go back though? I thought he just goes to Newcastle and shags Anna Friel and...
No, I think Santiago Munez, there was a moment where he's like, I want to go back to Mexico.
Drive
type
taxis
thing
with
early
my
on.
dad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, much like Santi, he gets another shot, and George
So do his
returns.
parents like send him straight
Yeah,
back
they
over?
sweet talk him. They're very gentle about it, but they persuade him to go back, and he does. And this time, after the 2 weeks, United give him a contract.
Nice.
But due to some weird rule, Northern Irish players can't have professional contracts in England until they're 17. So he has to play as an amateur for 2 years and work as an errand boy on the ship canal in Manchester.
What the
So it's not like the
fuck?
glamorous...
They didn't think he was that much of a genius.
Yeah, oh my God.
No, apparently he's just literally not allowed to play. Anyway, he's given lodging in this small house in a cul-de-sac with this lady, Mrs. Fullaway, who she sounds like a lovely woman. She's very relaxed about George getting up to no good. And although he's still quite shy at this age, he says he's very nervous about his accent and how people will receive it. But there are signs of the dirty dog he'll become. So he becomes inseparable best mates with Mrs. Fullaway's son. And he has this girlfriend, and Georgie can't resist slipping a note in her pocket, asking her to meet up. And she promptly ditches the boy and just takes up with George.
That's really shitting where you eat, isn't it?
Yeah, this boy's basically your brother.
Yeah, and like his parent, like you're being put up in their fucking house.
I get the feeling from Mrs. Fullaway, as we'll see, because she sticks around far too late in their story, that she's just like, oh, you boys. It's all just like whatever. And actually, her son does forgive George. They remain friends.
Yeah, I mean, if George Best fucked me over, I'd probably forgive him because he's George Best.
I think even at this point, he's on the books at United.
Yeah.
and the ship canal. You know, he's got access to all sorts. Whatever they're into back then, like Diabolos and shit. What are the toys? They're shit.
Pushing the hoop down.
Yeah.
Cup ball thing. Can't do
Loads
that.
of those.
Anyway, he breaks into the United first team in 1963. He's only 17, but from minute one, he's a star. So on his debut, the press and the fans are just in awe of his dribbling. He like beats a few defenders. And, you know, for United, the Munich air crash was 5 years earlier. So they're still very scarred by that. And they're in a sort of like rebuild phase. There's a couple of survivors. Bobby Charlton's there, obviously, most famously. But they're really looking to youth. And so George Best becomes this symbol of hope for United fans. But of course, this is the early 60s. It's the era of rock and roll. And he's this good-looking boy. He's already got this like slightly, what would be called flamboyant style at the time, which basically means didn't tuck his shirt in and let his socks roll down.
Yeah.
But this makes him a star outside the terraces. And even when he's 17, he's got girls sending him letters offering to spend the night with him.
Pedos.
So apparently one of them hand delivers a home iced fruitcake with his name embossed on it to Old Trafford.
What? That's so cute. An iced fruitcake.
There's quite a lot of just like quaint early 60s stuff coming up. In 1965, the Rolling Stones play The Last Time on Top of the Pops. And you can see, we'll watch the clip in a sec, it's got Mick Jagger sort of miming along, looking very unbothered. And suddenly the camera's cut to George Best shuffling nervously on the dance floor. Let's have a look. There he is.
Wow.
Looking quite serious.
What a beautiful young boy. That's so funny. God, yeah.
Swaying.
The most Northern Irish man at a disco.
Yeah, so he actually says, this is rare footage because I never dance because Belfast men don't dance.
Yeah.
Do you dance?
I am really not a dancer. I find it the most horrifying. Like, actually, to be fair, last night I was absolutely smashed dancing dancing for my life, but it was beautiful stuff.
Were you sort of bopping nervously like George Best?
No, I was giving it absolute beans last night. I think there's something, because I hate like dance music and DJs and all that stuff, but because I was at like a comedy rave and there's people doing stand up, which is like my obsessive interest, I think like that took my focus enough that I could just like
swing into the one-liners.
Man, yeah, I was loving it. I was loving life. So good. So I very rarely dance, but I couldn't say not at all, given that a mere, I would say, 10 hours ago, I was doing a lot of dancing.
Yeah. Hopefully your dancing got good reviews like Best. So one of the chroniclers of the time said, Best didn't look at all out of place among the lovely young creatures frogging expressionless.
Frogging? Frogging.
Frogging's the one like, it's that 60s dance, isn't it?
What? I don't know. What's the...
Frogging is like,
I've never heard
it's
that
like,
oh, better...
you know, like
Oh,
really, if you think of
yeah.
like 60s dancing.
Yeah.
But yeah, they are
That's
quite
so
expressionless.
Frogging expressionless. If my dancing was described as frogging expressionless.
It's a type of dance, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, he's about to go up the superstar scale quite a lot because in 1966, Man United draw the great Benfica side in the European Cup quarter-final. So this is the team of Eusebio. They'd won back-to-back European Cups 5 years earlier. No one's really giving United a chance, but in the first leg at home, they win 3-2. And so going to Lisbon, you know, Matt Busby, the manager, just wants everyone to keep it tight for the first 20 minutes. Just sit back. Let's try and protect this lead, see if we can nick something. But George Best is not listening. And after 7 minutes, he scores a header. He outjumps the keeper and two defenders. And 6 minutes later, he dribbles past two defenders for a wonder goal. I've got a clip.
Here comes Best again. What a player this boy is. He's got another.
That's just great.
It's a brilliant goal. United win 5-1. And Matt Busby says after, I wish he wouldn't listen to me more often.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
You love
Lovely.
that.
He will live to regret that.
Yeah.
Aged very badly.
Yeah. It's nice to like actually watch some footage of him playing because we've got no clue. Anyway, the whole world is watching this game and they are in love. So the Portuguese press call him a Beatle called Best because of his mop top haircut and his swagger. Another newspaper in Portugal calls him the fifth Beatle. I've always thought this must be quite painful for Pete Best, who, you know, Pete Best was the original drummer in the Beatles. They kicked out. He
That's
was the
so
fifth
funny.
Beatle called Best. Just reading those headlines like, fuck.
George Martin was the fifth Beatle.
Who's Pete Best then?
He was
Pete
the
Best was
drummer
the
that
drummer,
Ringo
replaced.
replaced.
Is he not the fifth Beatle?
No,
George
George
Martin's
Martin was
the
definitely
fifth
He's like the
Beatle.
producer, isn't he?
Yeah.
George, what I'm hearing is you trying to elevate producers.
That is what people
Producer's
say.
called
George
George.
Martin's a bit Beatle.
Okay, I
But
got
it
the
is
wrong
funny
bit
that Pete Best is.
I'm the third cock, one ball.
Anyway, back at Heathrow where George Best just landed. He is now a major celebrity from this point onwards. He's only 19 at this point.
That's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, and actually by chance, a few days later, it is the grand opening of this boutique clothing shop that he's opening in Manchester called Edwardia.
He's, as in George Best is
Yeah.
opening? or-
George Best runs a number of very sort of swinging 60s business, nightclubs, restaurants. One of them's an alcohol-free nightclub, which I find so funny.
That's so off-brand.
I think it's just a licensing issue, I don't know. But he also has this clothing boutique, and the day it's opening, a few days later, he arrives and there's 400 schoolgirls out there screaming and banging on the windows. So it's Beatlemania. He also, he suddenly everyone's throwing money at him, so he gets a column in the Daily Express, which is
So funny.
that's a bigger deal then than it is.
yeah, that
Daily
feels
Express is selling like
shit,
10
man.
million copies
He's made
a day.
it. Yeah.
That's the big newspaper. Whereas now it's like Diana and Weather News, isn't it? It's different. He does an advert for Cookstown sausages. Does one for
Good sausages, to be fair.
Does one for Spanish oranges. Good oranges. And he does one just for eggs. We
Just
can
the
watch it.
concept of eggs.
Yeah, this one's slightly later. Yeah, for the British egg lobby.
I always wanted to be sponsored by a lobby.
Yeah, well,
I always think it's crazy that Off Menu are
Jeez.
sponsored by the broccoli lobby.
are they?
Really?
I really want. We want to
Wow.
get milk on board.
Yeah, big milk.
We want to be sponsored by Big Milk.
Did you see there was the gymnast at the Olympics? It was Parmesan, Big Parma.
Oh, that's so great.
May I have your autograph, please, Mr. Best? I seen you on telly.
And I've seen you on telly. You're on Dad's nephew, aren't you?
Yeah,
Remember that last match in Spain?
cool.
Terrible game. Didn't have an egg for breakfast.
Well, there you are.
I always play better when I've had my E for B. E for B and be your best.
Of course, I play centre forward, you know. Eva B and Georgie Best! Eva B and Georgie Best!
If I hadn't told you that advert was for eggs, would you have realised?
They really rattle through the dialogue, don't
Yeah.
they? I was everyone's on to actual records. I thought I was going to say
It's like old films are a bit like that, aren't
Yeah,
they?
Could
You tell that was an eggs advert. A for B.
E for B is just quite a. Why would you shorten eggs?
want
Eggs is not a
eggs
long
for
word.
They want
Yeah.
children yelling at their mum, E for B.
E for B.
I
And
think is the
Georgie
idea.
Best,
I think
yeah.
advertising sort of come on a bit since then.
Can I have your autograph, Mr. Best? I like eggs for breakfast.
Did you see the girl who comes up and just kisses him on the
Yeah,
cheek?
yeah.
That's
just
the
randomly in the
biggest
middle
smile
of
on
it.
his face.
Is that meant to be a bit like Lynx adverts, where it's like, if you eat eggs,
Yeah.
this will be
You
you.
have E for B.
I've got another ad from, this is 1970, so a little bit later, but it's just a great example of how things have changed. This is him doing an advert for a bra company.
It seems girls who wear body language feel prettier than girls who wear ordinary half-cut bras.
So she's walking to a bar and George Best is on the table.
So that girls who wear body language have to say no rather more often than girls in ordinary half-cut bras.
There's a gentleman at the bar who wants to know if you'd marry him.
Body language by Kotex. Wear it, and you may have to say no.
You may have to say no more often.
Also, why is the voiceover actor on this? It sounds like it's doing one of those like pathé education.
Yeah. Girls
You
feel
wear this
prettier.
bra.
Also,
You
yeah,
wear
so what's that premise? You will be pestered by men more.
Yeah.
You may have to say no more.
God.
What do women want? Women want to be harassed in bars.
Oh my god. Yeah, this is real. Like, everybody in the advertising office is drunk as fuck.
Yeah.
And they're just like, well, how do you advertise bras, boys?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's good. He doesn't actually have a line in there. It's just his face.
Just
Just looking a bit seedy.
Just
It's sort of
looking-
like further
looking creepy at
back on the
tits.
like evolution scale of the like victim blaming of like, oh well, you know, if you were wearing a short skirt, then you were sort of asking for it.
Yeah.
That was like that was a selling point. But
yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
you will
Got
be
to
you
the
will
short
be sexually harassed.
Anyway, so he's earning at this point, I was surprised to learn, Man United are paying him £1,000 a week, which is 23 grand in today's money.
That's big
So
money
it's
because
actually-
you kind of think that's like professional era money.
It's over $1 million a year in today's money.
Yeah, that's fucking
And then he's getting the
wild.
same again in endorsements. So he's properly rich. Despite his mad wealth and huge fame, he's still living in his single bed at Mrs. Fullerton's house, which I cannot get my head around.
Like, she is either a complete creep or must be annoyed at this point.
Well, apparently Mrs. Fullerton, he does say the one thing she did that annoyed him is she would wake him up every morning by tickling his nose.
What?
Yeah.
This woman's a creep.
No, I think it's sort of sweet, but
What?
it's fucking annoying.
Her poor son has just been forgotten in the next bedroom. He's like, I remember when she used to do that to me.
Yeah, you're no son of mine.
Yeah, you get the impression she was quite obsessed with Georgie.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's anything creepy about it. Anyway, he does, at this point, he needs to find somewhere else to shag. So he buys a car so he can shag on the back seat. So he's sort of,
Wow.
I mean, he's earning enough to buy a house at this point. But he then also befriends Mike Summerby from Man City. They become best mates. And they do rent a flat together just to, quote, entertain the ladies. But he still, when he's not shagging, he'll still go and stay at Mrs. Fullerton's. It's bizarre. Him and Summerby, actually, they become very close. And they actually choreograph moves when they play against each other. So in the Manchester derby, they'll agree beforehand that they both will get to nutmeg each other, and then they'll just do it in the match.
This is like Ivan Toney shit.
It kind of is match fixing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Spot fixing. Yeah.
I mean, I guess you didn't have those side bets at the time of like number of nutmegs or whatever.
Yeah, but they're not doing it for, over and under. They're not doing it for money. They're just
for a laugh.
Just the bands.
God, football was shit then, wasn't it? Like,
yeah, you do wonder, don't you? He says that the 1966-7 season were the happiest days of my life. So Man United win the title. He's top scorer, I think. And he's just constantly out with his celeb pals.
Good season. Celtic won the European Cup.
Correct, yeah. First British team to win it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to call Celtic a British team. I always think that when that fact gets brought up, it's just a bit like...
I'm sure they'll appreciate it.
I know what you mean, but...
Had a telegram from the Queen.
Mad, that team are crazy. They were like all born within 11 miles of the stadium.
Really?
Wow.
It's like never going to happen again stuff.
And is Jock Stein the manager?
Yeah.
Is he born in...
I think he's Glaswegian. It's absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
Like they're all just like local boys
That's mental.
who went on to win the European Cup. And it's just that it's inconceivable now that would ever happen.
That's the thing. Football, of it, maybe the game was not as appealing, but like it was so much more romantic.
That's so it's so.
You know, like, and you look at the winners in the other years. It's like, oh, they lost to Steaua Bucharest, and you're like, that's just never going to happen.
It feels like there's not going to be this like that thing of like Benfica being like an absolute like world beating team, and then like. Is there a world where Benfica get back up to where they were? Like I just don't
so you just had
know.
these like random runs where like Ajax got to the semi-finals, but that seemed like
it's sort of
at
like
the
a
time.
freak thing. It's like
But it's
Leicester
like even
winning
back
the Prem. You're like,
back in the 90s, didn't like Red Star Belgrade or something win it?
That was the
when
watershed,
when
right?
it started
Premier League
changing.
is
Right?
basically
Yeah.
the watershed. Back in 1967. So United win the title of that league. He's so best by this point. He's just constantly out with his new celeb pals, constantly shagging. Basically, he lists some of his conquests in his book. There's probably about 10 different Miss Worlds. He's very into beauty queens. He also shags Barbara Windsor, who younger listeners will know as Peggy Mitchell from EastEnders. You guys know her? You know, get out of my pub.
very funny.
Yeah. Probably the most iconic EastEnders character. But back then she was like a pin-up. She was the star of Carry On. She'd be in a Carry On film where she's like naked, but her bits are obscured by like a vase, and she's holding 2 oranges in front of her tits, like that kind of thing.
Classy bit of comedy.
Yeah. She said of her affair with Best, he was this absolute vision. In the 60s, he was so beautiful.
I think we've seen what he looked like in the 60s, and he's just like a fucking kind of ugly guy.
Yeah, I don't get it.
Do you think? Yeah, I feel like there's some photos where he does look hot, and there's some where like he's
It's
just got
his
the
teeth.
he's got the 60s teeth. His
Yeah,
teeth are
just
all
an
I've never
old
really
boozy
seen
cigarette stained teeth that are just like.
I mean, it was slim pickings.
Yeah,
back then. That's
yeah,
what
Yeah,
it
I
was
guess if
called.
everyone
very
has it,
true.
Yeah.
then it's a bit like when you look at like Henry VIII's wives, and you're like, could I see that you could be hot? But you can't really.
Yes. But then they didn't.
Do you know what I mean, though?
Portraits,
But, like, he's got the pick of like Europe.
I always think that when you look at these old pictures of women who's like, this was like the most beautiful woman in France, you look at it, it's like, really?
But there was
Yeah.
one, wasn't there, with Henry
Quite
VIII,
just, like,
where
pale
they showed him a painting of her, and he goes, "Yep, I'll marry her." And then she came, and he was like, "What the fuck? This is completely." It was like, you know, in
Catfishing.
Tinder, yeah,
That's
making
so
catfish.
funny.
And he was fuming. I guess he cut her head off or
Probably
something.
just cut her head off, yeah. But I think the thing at the time for them was like, you didn't see, like we see all the hottest people on Instagram all the time. So it's just like, there's a stunner, there's a stunner, there's a stunner. Whereas they kind of just saw the people in their town,
You got
and
two
then
channels
whoever
on
was on
TV.
TV.
Yeah.
And on the two channels on TV. So we're just like, yeah. And if the thing on TV is football and it's Bobby Charlton and George Best,
Yeah.
you're like, he is
all for footballers.
fucking beautiful.
Yeah.
You've got like magazines.
All of
haven't you?
the TV presenters would sort of just like, they look like Des Lynam.
Yeah, well, we were talking about Des Lynam was a heartthrob.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Mental. And he shagged his next door neighbour and like, who was it? What's her name? Famous actress.
Rachel Weisz,
Rachel
who's
Weisz
married
was
to
like,
Daniel
"There's
Craig.
just something, yeah.
She
Like,
said
there's
that
something
she said
about
that,
him.
She said Des Lynam was the most charismatic man she's ever met.
Des.
Crazy.
So I
Twinkle in his
can
eyes.
kind of see that George Best was quite good looking, but everyone says he was like stunning.
Yeah.
Apart from Barbara Windsor and the Miss Worlds, I do find his sort of the conquests he brags about, they're like a little bit disappointing from the vantage point of 2024. There's a lot of names that you just don't recognise, who I guess were very big in the 60s. The ones I did recognise in his book, Bruce Forsyth's daughter Debbie, and he says in his book, a very pretty girl named Georgie Lawton, who turned out to be the daughter of Ruth Ellis, the last woman to be hanged in Britain.
I mean, fair fucking play.
I guess that is a turn on.
I like a bad girl.
Yeah. To be fair, there's something quite Alan Partridge about this, about that. And actually, there are a couple of other bits in his book I wanted to read out that can be quite Alan Partridge. He said, I've always enjoyed women and I've never had the slightest inclination or interest in men, or them in me. I've never been pestered by gays.
Do you know what? And I was about to say this anyway, and this might be mad. I think a lot of this screams closeted gay guy.
Okay.
Because it's all this kind of like they're the women that everybody else fancies.
Yeah.
And stealing people's wives and girlfriends is a classic.
It's just like this whole like it's showing off and like presenting as like, I'm a big shagger, so I'm gonna shag like this actress and like all the beauty pageants, like 10 Miss Worlds. It's like, it's like it's all based on what other people have said is like attractive women. He's not just like, I shagged loads of hot girls. It's like, I shagged everybody who you think is hot, didn't I? And then in his book to be like, I'm fucking not, like a Macklemore song, I'm not gay, all right? But it's fine if you are gay, but I'm not gay.
Yeah.
So you should just leave me alone for a second.
To be fair, going for Miss World is what a closeted gay guy would think. You're like, well, she's the best looking woman
We've
in the
all
world.
agreed.
Yeah.
We've all agreed.
It's been voted.
It's quite a gay choice.
Voted by the straightest of boys at those beauty pageants.
Yeah, I see it.
I think we can say, I'm going to say that. I'm going to put that out there. I think George Best is gay.
Yeah, he's definitely got a point to prove.
It's the hill you'll die on.
Yeah. If this was what gets me cancelled, saying George Best is gay, I'm into that. I'm into that.
He also, on STIs, he says, considering what I went through, it's very surprising I didn't come down with something every night. Over the years, I've only ever been infected once.
With what?
He gave a Playboy bunny the clap. Once
Yeah,
you,
it's a
once you
Playboy
see this
bunny.
closeted gay thing, it's hard to unsee. His boozing's also going up a notch. So originally he viewed drinking as a cure for his shyness, but by the mid-60s he's just developed a real taste for it. And him and his crew of celeb pals will just like pick a spot in Manchester and that'll become like the cool place. And in the mid-60s they decide their new favourite spot is this old man pub with sawdust floors called the Brown Bull. And all the celebrities follow there. So he says, the governor was serving brown and mild to railway workers one day and then found himself quaffing champagne with footballers, rock stars and the cast of Coronation Street, which again was more glamorous in the 60s, guys. You've got to remember there are only 3 channels. Like 30 million people watch Corrie every week. It was a big deal.
That's big.
He says Jermaine Greer and Michael Parkinson become regulars, which is it's quite good.
Jermaine Greer.
Yeah,
Michael
famous feminist, and he's just a journalist at that point.
Crack.
Anyway, he's still only 21 at this point, but on the pitch he is about to reach the pinnacle of his career when Man United reach the 1968 European Cup final, and it's against their old friends Benfica. It's 10 years after the Munich air crash. It's at Wembley, so it's highly significant.
Yeah.
As if you needed it to be. And, you know, most of the team are quite nervous, but while his teammates are getting an early night, George finds a novel way to relax before the big game by sleeping with a particular young lady called Sue. I don't know what he means by that. Picky.
Sue Barker.
Yeah, possibly. Probably a less famous Sue.
Or is it a matter like when if he's gay and he's checking about it, so, oh, what were you up to last night? particular young lady called Sue.
Yeah, she goes to
Sue,
a different
Sue.
school. She doesn't have Bebo.
It's one of Bruce Forsyth's.
I love how well this is adding up. He's gay.
Yeah. There's more. Anyway, so the game finishes 1-1 at half time. It's quite tense.
It finishes 1-1 at half time.
Sorry, at full time. So the game is locked at 1-1 at full time.
Is that full time or half time?
It's full time, and everyone's nervous. But as extra time starts, George Best scores another great goal. We've got a clip.
Ooh.
Waiting to receive was Mighty Best. He simply walked the ball into the net. What a goal! United in the lead. And that wasn't all. The Busby Babes were raring to go. They hammered Benfica.
It's the first of 3 extra time goals for United, who win the European Cup. It's a huge moment, particularly for Matt Busby, who'd rebuilt this team.
Yeah, first English team to win the European
English, not British, because Celtic, that great British side, did Queen and Country proud 1 year earlier.
It is funny, isn't it? It's funny. Yeah. You're just like, it's such a bad record for them to have.
Well, I'm proud of them for doing it for us.
For Lizzie.
Best says after that game, he gets so drunk he doesn't remember leaving the stadium. It's sort of the first hint at the boozing going beyond fun and getting quite...
He doesn't remember, he gets so drunk in the stadium, he doesn't, I guess, like changing room,
champagne's flowing in the
stuff.
changing room. He said he was on top of the world until that point. And afterwards as well, it's really his finest hour. So he's crowned European Footballer of the Year, which is now the Ballon d'Or.
Yes, because it was a real like colonial vibe. I read about this recently. Ballon d'Or was just Europe.
Yeah,
until like
because they didn't want to give it to Pele. Basically,
yeah, it's pretty convenient that the best player in the world was playing in Brazil at the time. So yeah, it's a bit. I don't know. The fact that it's the Ballon d'Or is sort of in looking back, it's been categorised as a Ballon d'Or. But whatever.
Yeah,
he's arguably the best player in the world at this point, and he's still only 21.
21. It's so crazy.
Megastar, mobbed everywhere he goes. The first superstar footballer. Everyone wants a piece of him, but both George Best and Man United are about to fall apart. So this is the end for Matt Busby, really. He does another season and then retires. And United, they bring in these new managers, a succession who George really doesn't rate. It's a bit post-Fergie, but arguably worse. And he really just stops caring about football around this point. So he starts skipping training. He says he doesn't speak to the younger players who he doesn't rate. I think he's a bit of a cog.
Yeah, it's so rude to have come in at 17 and obviously been like, you know.
But he, if they're not good enough, I don't know. Save it for the overlap. The boozing goes up a notch as well, again. And at this point, he's starting to resemble like the alcoholic that people think of today. This is the year he says famously, in 1969, I gave up women and alcohol. It was the worst 20 minutes of my life.
Listen, it's a good line.
Yeah, it's after dinner
classic
speaking
little
stuff,
bit of fun.
Isn't it?
Real. It's real an evening with vibes.
Yeah. Him and Jimmy Tarbuck.
There's a lot more of that coming.
He says he's always the last to bed at this point, and you're like, that's kind of fun. But he's like, no, I was always the last. So he gets given the keys to the Brown Bull, and he's always the last to leave there. He locks up, and then afterwards, everyone goes to bed. He goes to Phyllis's, which is a drinking den owned by Phil Lynett's mum, who's called Phyllis. So this is like a bar for shift workers who finish at 6 a.m. and they want to have a last drink before they go home. But for George, it's last drink before bed. So he says he sits there eating her Irish stew with a vodka on his own at 6 a.m. It's getting a bit sad. And on the pitch, he's becoming more unpredictable. So they play in the Intercontinental Cup that year, having won the European Cup. They play Estudiantes, the Argentine side, and Estudiantes are super violent. And by the end of the second leg, George has had enough, and he's sent off for punching an opponent. So he's becoming quite wayward.
Yeah.
Still the top scorer for United every season. And off the pitch, he's celebrating his own record. He says he shags 7 women in a day and provides this description of it, which is slightly worrying in places. He says, in one mad 24 hours in Manchester, I went to bed with 7 different women. I woke up with one girl. That lunchtime, I went to the Brown Bull and met up with one of the girls from Granada Studios who was on her lunch break. Spent an hour with her in her room. When I was done, I went round to meet the young niece of some friends as she came out of school. There it is. She made the mistake of going out afterwards to do some shopping, leaving me in the flat with her cousin. That made it 4. Then it was back to my own place with a girl I saw occasionally. Then I took another girl out, went to the casino. And at 4:30 a.m., I drove round to the home of another girl I vaguely knew.
Drove round to it as
Yeah,
well.
oh, yeah,
It was
hammered.
crazy.
So
I absolutely smashed it.
Bit of an illness at this point.
Yeah. He's got many demons at this point.
And I'm sure in the book it's like, isn't this great? And you're like, no, it's really sad.
Yeah.
That sounds like an awful day.
Yeah, tiring as well. I mean,
Yeah.
the idea of ever shagging 7 times in a day sounds miserable to me. But and even at 21, I don't think I was mustering those.
But then it might just not have happened because he's gay. So
Yeah. So I'm just banging Phil Lynott.
yeah.
He does get himself into a lot of scrapes because he's quite big on being like a Mr. Steal Your Girl and just like shagging. So he's constantly dealing with these like livid boyfriends or apologising to his own friends for shagging their girlfriends. At one point, he gets a death threat before a match from the brother of a girl he shagged.
Wow.
And in 1971, he gets one from the IRA, a death threat. I should clarify.
For doing what?
So apparently there's some rumour. He was never involved in loyalist politics at all. Like, he wants there to be a united Irish football team. But there was some bullshit rumour spread that he donated to some loyalist cause.
Right.
And this fake rumour spreads. And there's this big debate. Basically, the IRA say, like, we've got snipers in the crowd and we're going to shoot you on the pitch. I think it's a televised game as well.
That would be so crazy if that happened.
A bit like Steve Bruce's novel plots. And that basically, it's a bit like the Trump shit. Like
Yeah.
televised shootings.
Yeah, but at a football game is so wild.
Anyway, there's a lot of umming and ahhing. Will he play? In the end, he decides to play and he scores. And after the match, Newcastle, their opponents, the manager walks into the press conference and he just says, "I wish they'd shot the little bugger." nice line.
Yeah.
It can backfire in other ways, his wayward love life. So he sees this Danish girl for a while, Ava Haraldstead, and she tells the press they're engaged. Anyway, he gets
Now,
bored.
when you say Danish girl, is that like
Eddie Redmayne.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe she was.
This is Danish.
Yeah,
you know?
I see it.
Is that what we're saying?
I think I don't know what the terminology is. She's cisgendered. Is that the word I'm looking for? Yeah.
I believe so. She probably wouldn't have said that at the time.
I don't think so. Anyway, he gets bored of her, breaks it off after a couple of months, and she sues him for breach of promise.
Because they were engaged?
Yeah, it's the last case of that kind in English law. They got rid of the law like a year later, but she wins 500 quid. Anyway, the night before the court case, his lawyer's sort of his drinking buddy, and they're in the bar drinking before the court case, and he's like, "I better get you home. You need a quiet night. Come and stay with me." And the lawyer passes out on the sofa, and George proceeds to shag his wife. Real nice stuff. But again, hard to view.
How did the court case go the following day?
But he lost. He paid 500 quid.
Crazy to shag a divorce lawyer's wife.
Yeah.
Like, surely that's a bad move.
Yeah. Back on the pitch, he is still capable of the odd magic moment. So there's a famous FA Cup game against Northampton. He scores 6 goals.
Wow.
It's Northampton. He basically humiliates
6
the
is still wild, no matter who you're playing against.
I'm never that into those games. I don't really see that.
Yeah, it just gets very kind of sad and boring after a while.
Apparently he was like really humiliating the keeper. The keeper then did like a run of speaking gigs because he was such a comedy figure.
Yeah.
People shoving custard pies in his face kind of vibes, you know what I mean?
That's funny.
Object of derision. But the Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, sends best fan mail. He's so impressed by that game. Yeah, apparently
by being like a postman and
apparently he
builder.
just loves it.
Wow.
In some ways, that is his last hurrah. So he's still United's top scorer for a few other seasons after that, but he's lost interest in playing. There's an incident on the pitch where he ends a guy's career with this accidental horror tackle, and he's called to an FA hearing. And Matt Busby is caretaker of Man United again, so he's the manager, and Busby meets him outside, and Best's looking like green, just so hungover. And they get into the lift, and Best just pukes all over the lift, and he's like, "Oh, fucking hell, George." Anyway, he's found guilty, and he gets a 4-match ban, and then fails to show up for training the next week. When he's finally fit to play again, they're due to play Chelsea, and he just doesn't show up for the game. He instead goes and sees Irish actress Sinead Cusack.
I've met her.
Oh, really?
She's really sound.
Right. She banged George Best.
Or maybe I've met one of her, because they're like an acting, like there's loads of them, the
Oh,
Cusacks,
right.
there's like, they're just in all sorts of shit. That's so funny. So he just goes around to Sinead's house.
Yeah, so he apparently the next morning, so he's meant to be playing Chelsea and never shows. He's named in the team, never plays.
What the
The next
fuck?
morning they open the curtains and the street is just full of press. You know, like in Notting Hill when they open the door.
Yeah.
It's like that. And he stays there for 4 days, just too scared to go out. He gets a police escort out in the end. So these are all like front page stories.
Yeah.
In response, United suspend him for 2 weeks and order him to move back in with Mrs. Fullaway.
Yo!
So he had been living in his own flat for a bit,
Yeah,
and
and
he's back in his
the
single
lady
bed.
entertaining flat.
I'm picturing it being like sort of just like quite damp in his room. You know what I mean? It's just like an old decors from the war. It's got one of
Yeah,
those plastic
yeah.
sheets in case you piss the bed.
Yeah,
That sort of vibe.
It's like Harry Potter at the
The
Dursleys.
Dursleys, yeah.
It does feel like Miss Fullaway like might keep him on the straight and narrow.
I think that's
but-
the idea.
Yeah.
She's not doing a great job.
No.
It's less nose tickling and more
Yeah.
more stick.
Yeah.
Anyway, he repeats this trick several times. So one December, I think in 1972, he disappears for a whole month and he's just clubbing or in bed with Miss World Carolyn Moore. It's another Miss
Yeah,
World.
another
Chalk
Miss
it up.
World. Yeah,
Does anyone
come
keep
It
on.
was a big
count?
deal back then, Miss World, right?
Yeah, among
Much-
gay guys.
I couldn't.
The Eurovision of its day.
Anyway, in 1972, Best is so sick of all the press attention he's getting because he's being hounded that he retires. But it doesn't last long. He
At what age?
26. But he then
So
he then just returns for preseason training and acts like nothing's happened. But we are near the end. In late 1973, Man United suspend him and transfer list him. They're at the end of their tether by this point.
Yeah, I mean.
And finally,
So at what point, sorry, in 1972, is he still like top scorer?
yeah, I think that's his last season. Is the one that ends in 72. It's his 6th consecutive but final top scoring season.
Yeah.
And the following season's just like a full-on joke. He plays his last game for the club in January 74. He's only 27, but the manager, who's Tommy Docherty at that point, he claims that Best turned up for the game drunk with a girl on his arm. Best denies it, but he's so angry at how he's been treated, he walks out on the club forever. And Man United are relegated that season.
Wow.
6 years.
European Cup to relegation.
Yeah, that's wild.
That's
Yeah.
quick.
So they fell apart. So maybe he had a bit of a point about his teammates.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it was a bit of a shambles. But to go from a team like that, that's like amazing, and then being a rebuild.
I mean, he's complaining about his teammates, but it sounds like he wasn't
that's
quite
it.
on top
Yeah,
form.
yeah, yeah.
Examples, yeah. So that is it. George Best has left Man United. Man United are playing in the 2nd division. But for George, the trouble is only just getting started. And on that bombshell, we've reached the end of part 1. So join us next week for part 2 as George embarks on his new life as a hired gun, where his wild life will see him stabbed in the arse, thrown in jail, and much, much more. See you then.